going. One final thought that I wanted to use to end this podcast. Just personally, I am going through a bit of a tax problem. Hopefully, I will get a positive resolution. But I want to bring it up because I want to talk about another thing that the government does that is completely unconstitutional. Right? So, I put my home into a trust back in 2014. And so basically, I transferred the title of the LLC that owns the house, because the house was owned by an LLC, and I transferred that into a trust. Kind of an estate planning move. A lot of people do that. A lot of people that have assets put them in a trust. This is a house, and I've since put a lot of other assets into trust. But this particular trust is a foreign trust, and so there are other benefits that come with having a foreign trust rather than a domestic trust. Again, it's a very common thing for people to do. And the trust does not actually pay any taxes because the whole thing passes through to me. So whatever income the trust earns, is the tax falls to me. And so it just passes right through to me. But you still have to file a tax return for the trust, even though it's never going to owe any money, even though I'm filing my own tax return and declaring any income in the trust as my own and paying the taxes. You still have to file the return because it's foreign. Now, apparently, I didn't do that in time. I was due on a certain date, and my accountants filed it late, or maybe somebody didn't realize. I thought I changed accountants in 2014. I was doing a lot of stuff, and maybe the new accountants thought the old accountants did it, and the old accountants, left it to the new account. But whatever reason is, I ended up filing that form late. Now, remember, I don't owe any taxes. Right? Zero taxes were owed, no interest, no penalties. Well, I finally got a penalty letter from the IRS, and they said, "Hey, you paid this late. You need to pay the penalty, and here's an envelope. Just put your check in and mail it in." And so the penalty for filing late was $200,000. $200,000 for filing a form late, where I didn't even owe any taxes, didn't owe any interest or penalties. That's the fee. Now, initially, my accountants wrote a letter and said, look, to try to get them to waive the penalty or expunge it. And they finally wrote back and they said, no, ignorance is no excuse. If you didn't know about it, whatever, you still got to pay it. Again, here's an envelope, put your check in for $200,000 and mail it in. So now I've got to appeal that. And if I appeal that and I lose, then what the supposed remedy is I actually pay the $200,000 to the IRS. And then if I want, I can go to tax court and challenge it there. And then if I lose that, I can go into the federal court system. But my rationale for challenging it, and first of all, there are some rules that the IRS has where, if you overlook something, honestly, that if it's your first time doing it, that they could waive the penalty. But what I mentioned to my accountant, I said, have you ever heard of the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution? And he really wasn't familiar with it. And he's a lawyer, too. He's a tax lawyer. So most lawyers don't know much about the Constitution, which is unfortunate. But so I read him the Eighth Amendment. And the Eighth Amendment is pretty short. I'm going to read it to you on right now. It says, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So no excessive fines can be imposed. So the Eighth Amendment says the United States government cannot impose an excessive fine. Now, if a $200,000 fine for filing a form late is not excessive, I don't know what is. I mean, it's not even like the IRS told me, hey, you forgot to file this form. I filed it. And then they got it late. And then they sent me the bill for filing it late. So they didn't even know that it was filed late. I sent it in because my accountant said, oh, realize it. Wait a minute. I don't think we filed this form. So they went and filed it. And now I get a $200,000 tax, which is so ludicrous for filing a form late. I mean, first of all, the average American, I think the average income for an American is what, $40,000 a year? Something like that. So this is 5 times the average income of an American is the fine for filing a form late. I mean, come on. I mean, how could that not be excessive, right? I mean, it's like if you were speeding and a cop pulled you over and he's like, okay, you were speeding. Here's your ticket. It's $200,000. I mean, Is someone going to pay that? Like, that's not excessive. This is a form, right? Filing a form late. I mean, sometimes you can say, well, the penalty is a percentage of the tax that you owe, but I didn't owe any tax, right? So it's just a form. It's just in letting the government know that I put this asset into this trust, and I let them know late, right? Probably within the same year. I just missed the deadline. So I officially informed them that a house that used to be in the name of an LLC in the U.S. is now in the name of a foreign trust, but the house hasn't moved, right? And, there's no rental income associated with the house. And even if there was any income, I would have paid the tax on my personal return, but there was no tax to pay because there was no income on the asset. It just sat in this trust. And I just informed the IRS about it late, not even knowing that I had to do it, because I rely on professional accountants to file my tax. I pay these guys a lot of money to file my taxes. They're very complicated every year. Fortunately, since I live in Puerto Rico now, my tax bills themselves are very low. But it costs me a fortune to pay those low taxes, because I have all kinds of things I have to file. A lot of it has to do with my ownership of foreign assets, Europe Pacific Bank and different things that are overseas. Really complicates my returns. But if the IRS can simply impose a $200,000 fine because a form was filed late, right? If that is not an excessive fine, then I don't know what is. So what I told my accountant is, if we can't get this removed, right, just based on the fact that it's ridiculous and there was no ill will on my part, maybe it was an oversight somewhere along the way with a form that I didn't even realize had to be filed on an entity that doesn't even have a tax liability, that they can forgive it. Because ever since then, I've been filing on time. So I filed for 2015, I filed for 2016, for 2017, and now I'm filing for 2018. So all the other returns have come in on time. Just this first one, that's the first time I actually had to file it, because that's when I set the trust up. And I missed the first one. But I said, if we lose on these appeals within the IRS, if they're going to refuse this, then I want to challenge this. I want to take this. I actually have to pay the thing, though. I got to write a $200,000 check to the IRS, because the way the IRS makes it in tax court, you got to pay and then sue to get your money back, which again is a violation of due process, which is, I think that's the Fourth Amendment, right? They're taking my money without due process. They should have to sue me. They should have to prove in court that they're entitled to this $200,000 penalty. But the way everything works with the IRS is that even if you think they're wrong and they don't owe the money, you got to pay it anyway. And then you got to go into their rigged court, which is really like a star chamber, right? Tax court. And then you got to prove your innocence, right? Tax court, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. You're the moving party, and now the burden of proof is on you that you don't owe the money. What due process would be, according to the Constitution, is that the IRS thinks you owe money. They have to sue you. They have to take you to court, and they have the burden of proving that you owe the money. Instead, in tax court, you have to prove that you don't owe it, which turns jurisprudence on its head. But that would be my first step. I would have to take this thing to tax court and say, this is unconstitutional, it's a violation of the Eighth Amendment, and you got to strike down this fine. But I don't think the tax court's gonna do that. I think they're gonna say, we don't give a damn about the Constitution, this is tax court, you lose. But then, after I lose in tax court, I can appeal this case to a district federal court. And if I lose there, I could take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. But if the Supreme Court actually granted certiorari on my case, but maybe even an appellate court, I don't see how any competent court can validate a $200,000 fine on a form being late, right? And not saying that is excessive within the meaning of the Eighth Amendment, because they don't specify what is excessive, right? So you have to just, decide, right? It's like, pornography, right? The court says we can't define it, but we know it when we see it. Well, this is obscene, right? A $200,000 fine on a late form where no taxes are owed and no income was generated is the most obscene, excessive thing I've ever heard of. And so I would like to prevail. If I can prevail on that in the court, well, then the fines would be thrown out, right? Then nobody would ever be able to get hit with them. The government couldn't impose such a ridiculous fine. So part of me kind of hopes that I lose so I can take this case up to the Supreme Court and hopefully win for the American public. But that's just a small part of me, because I really don't want to write a $200,000 check and then have to pay the legal bill of taking this thing all the way up to the Supreme Court. That's the kind of stuff my dad did. He got himself wrapped up in all these legal battles. Now, I think this is more of an open and shut case than a lot of the constitutional arguments my father made. But I saw, how much time and effort he wasted, on that pursuit. And I would prefer not to have to do the same thing myself.